Before we get into hoisting, I want to tell you about a few definitions. Those are variable declaration, variable initialization, and variable assignment. So in our app.js, I'm going to comment out our code by simply selecting the code and then doing command /. So all this code is going to become comments, so it does not execute in our code over here. So if I just refresh, it's not going to run. So just to explain to you the concepts, I'm going to simply create a variable a, and that's it. I'm just going to create it var a, and that's it. So by creating this variable, it's actually called variable declaration. So the definition is the creation of a variable or creation of variables. Basically, when you just do var a, you're actually creating that variable into existence in the JavaScript engine environment. Now, the next thing you, let's say, want to do is console.log a. So when you do that, what is going to happen? Let's take a look. When you refresh, it says undefined, because although that variable exists in memory, it does not have a value. It says console.log, the engine looks for a, it does not get a value for it. It says, hey, it doesn't have a value. So if it does not have a value, the default value is undefined. So that undefined, which is a data type in JavaScript, gets printed. Now let's say if you want to assign a value to a variable which is already created, what do? You simply do a is equal to and now assign a value. So let's say I'm going to do coding, right? So now when you actually assign a value to a variable for the first time, it's actually called initialization. So variable initialization is the initial assignment of value to a variable. So you're assigning a value to a variable on line number 3. And now if I do console.log a, what is going to happen now? Let's take a look. Refresh, we get undefined on line number 2, and then coding on line number 4. So that gives us the impression that the code is running sequentially. So line number 1 works first, and then line number 2 runs, and then that's why we got this undefined over here. And then line number 3 assigns a new value, or the initial value, to that particular variable. And then console.log a runs, and the system says, hey, now a has coding, so I'm going to print coding over here. So that is the sequential nature of JavaScript. And let's say if you want to assign a value again, you can just do a is equal to something else. And now if you console.log it over here, now if I refresh, it prints this, and then something else, because it's all sequential. So now when you assign a value to a variable after it is already initialized, it's actually called variable assignment, assigning a value to a variable. And of course, you can always, at the time of declaration, assign a value. So I can just say 1 or something like 1. I'll just say 1. So over here, you're actually declaring and initializing the value both at the same time, right? So those are certain definitions to keep in mind. And you might be saying, oh, these are basics. But when we talk about hoisting from now onwards, this is going to make sense, all these definitions. So now let's take a look at something else. So let's say if I just have this piece of code, which is console.log a. And now if I refresh, what do you think is going to happen? Is it going to print undefined? What is it going to print? Let's take a look. I'm going to refresh, and it says uncaught reference error. A is not defined. It's not undefined. The word undefined is not there. The word not defined is there. That means the JavaScript engine looks for the variable a and it doesn't find it and says, hey, I don't know what a is. What is a? I don't know. So it says, we don't know what it is, so it's not defined. Okay, so that's an error message. Okay, now let's do something else. If I do var a is equal to, let's say, coding here. Now, if I refresh, what do you think is going to happen? Let's take a look. I'm going to refresh, and now it's still, actually, no, I didn't save it. Now refresh. It says undefined. Why is that? It should throw an error, right? It should throw an error because it comes on line number 1. It says, okay, console.log a. We don't know what a is. It should throw an error, but it does not. And the reason for that is hoisting. What hoisting is basically when before the JavaScript engine starts executing the code, starts running the code, it actually scans through the entire code and sees all the variables that are in existence of that program and then declares it on the top of that functional scope, or on top of the function if it's inside a function, or top of the program if it's not inside a function. So it's the same as writing like such. So it scans the code and says, oh, there's a variable that needs to be used. So I'm going to basically just create it before running the lines of code first. So it basically just declares those variables, all of them, and then starts executing. So when it comes to line number, let's say in this case 2, it's going to say, okay, I already know what A is. It doesn't have a value. I've declared it automatically. So I'm just going to print undefined. And that's why it does that. And then it goes to line number 3 and says, okay, we want to assign a value, right? So I'm going to assign coding to it. And then it actually assigns the value coding at this particular line or initializes it. So this is very delicate, this information, right? So let's take a look at the definition of hoisting. So variables are declared at the top of the function automatically and initialized at the time they are run. So even before the execution starts, those variables are automatically created or declared on the top of the program or the top of the function if this was inside a function, and then the execution starts. So that is the concept of hoisting, and it becomes very interesting when you start writing code because you can avoid errors or you can fix errors based on which order you have written your code. So let's take a look at function hoisting in the next video. Talk to you then.